First question for you, Admiral Richardson, and just so you all know, all the questions will be about the Arctic. No surprise. But Admiral, when you appeared before the Senate Armed Services Committee back in April, you mentioned that you signed on to a strategic outlook for the Arctic, which you said talked about the strategic objectives to defend U.S. sovereignty up in the Arctic. Can you briefly summarize the conclusions that were reached in that strategic outlook, and also more specific to this committee, what sorts of funding needs the Navy will require to accomplish those strategic objectives?
Yes, ma'am. It raised a couple of major points, and I'll be happy to provide you more details for the record. In fact, I'll give it, the whole outlook itself is available. But it talked, as you said, about defending our sovereignty, to make sure that we manage the dynamic situation in a stable and conflict-free way, that we are mindful of our responsibilities up there to preserve the freedom of those seas and those international passages, and then also to be mindful that we are part of a group of Arctic nations that have to operate together in a collaborative way to manage these, I guess, emerging opportunities is the way that you would best characterize it. So the strategy talks through all of that, and then points to making sure that we spend sufficient time up there so that we become familiar with the unique aspects of operating in the Arctic.
And then specific to that, how does this budget reflect some of those priorities and making sure that we are spending sufficient time?
Right. I think most of that would come through our operation and maintenance budget as we start to budget for those exercises that would go up there. In fact, Senator, as you're aware, we've increased the number of exercises that we've done up there, several exercises in 2018 and 2019, over and above historical norms. We've been consistent with our submarine ice camps up there. We sent the Harry S. Truman Strike Group north of the Arctic Circle for the first time since 1991, and we've got more planned. A major exercise with the Marine Corps up in Alaska this fall, and looking forward to continuing to build our skills there.
Let me ask you, Secretary Spencer, and I appreciated the conversation that we had discussing Adak in some depth. Can you share with me, with as much specificity as you can, the Navy's immediate and future intentions for the use of the facilities there in Adak, specifically whatever amphibious exercises, the use of the airstrip, and really how you might intend to utilize Adak, whether you're adequately funded to do so in the near term, and then also, if you can address, again, as specifically as you can, the Navy's interest in a deep water port in the Bering Sea, and where you are in any conversations with regards to funding of that.
Yes, Senator. As we talked, and to, again, amplify what the CNO said, one of my first events being Secretary of the Navy was the Arctic Council in Reykjavik, and it truly was an eye-opener for me, because sitting across the table was our Russian counterpart talking about the 10,000 Spetsnaz he has up there and the runways that he's bringing back to life for search and rescue. So it really was an eye-opener. And then as we started to peel the onion back, you saw all the Arctic countries, what they're doing up there, but more importantly and more concerning is the backbench countries that are not Arctic countries but are now putting themselves into the area. So it is a definite area of concern, and the United States Navy and Marine Corps is taking that into account. When it comes to Adak, the concept there is to do an exercise, amphibious exercise. There's an airstrip there, as you know, which will be involved also. We're talking
about... It's more than an airstrip. It's a pretty darn good
It is. You have regularly scheduled service in there, I think, three times a week.
Yes.
And we're talking about bringing the P-8s up there for possibly the exercise also. It is a gem of a place to train. I know the Marine Corps has looked at it intently for this summer, for the September exercise. We also have a May exercise coming up where we're doing something more on the mainland of Alaska with ship-to-shore refueling and some other exercises that we'll be doing. When it comes to the port, while we do not have a requirement for a port, yes, having a deep water port such as Nome would be an advantage in the area. This summer, the CNO and I have talked about having an exercise to go to the Bering Sea. We're still exploring to see if we could do a full passage. There's still ice up there in some places. We've been in the high Atlantic with the Truman. All of these are the beginning of the drumbeat that you will see us with regular operations in the Arctic.
Well, you know, we welcome that. We think that it is of a necessity. You mentioned Arctic Council. I'm going to be going over to Finland next week for the Arctic
Excellent.
Council there with the Secretary of State. You mentioned those countries that are not Arctic countries that are engaged. I'm going to be participating in yet another Arctic conference that will be held in Shanghai. So if you have other nations that are clearly non-Arctic nations that have as keen an interest as we are seeing right now, I am pushing us at all levels, at all departments, to be engaged, to stay engaged.